The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Chris Thompson wiped down the worn marble counter for the third time that morning, his calloused hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. What he didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, this moment of quiet desperation would transform into the most shocking revelation of his life, when the homeless man he was about to help would reveal himself as the billionaire owner of the entire hotel chain. "Excuse me." The sharp voice cut through the lobby like a knife. A middle-aged woman in an expensive coat stormed toward Chris's desk, her heels clicking against the faded tiles of the Pineview Inn's lobby. "I specifically requested a room with a view, and all I can see from my window is a dumpster." Chris looked up from the reservation book, his tired brown eyes immediately softening with genuine concern. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Henderson. Let me see what I can do for you." His fingers moved quickly across the outdated computer keyboard, the ancient machine whirring in protest. "I can move you to room 237, it overlooks our garden courtyard. No charge for the upgrade." "Well, it's about time someone showed some professionalism around here," she huffed, snatching the new key card from his hand without so much as a thank you. As Mrs. Henderson disappeared into the elevator, Chris slumped against his chair, running a hand through his disheveled brown hair. At 28, he looked older than his years, the weight of financial stress and 60-hour work weeks etched into the lines around his eyes. The Pineview Inn had been struggling for months, and every day brought new evidence of their declining fortunes. Another happy customer? Emma Rodriguez emerged from the back office, her usually bright smile replaced by a worried frown. At 25, she'd been Chris's closest friend and colleague for 3 years, her optimistic nature a perfect complement to his quiet determination. "She's actually not wrong to complain," Chris admitted, glancing around the lobby with its peeling wallpaper and mismatched furniture. "This place is falling apart, and we both know it." Emma moved closer, lowering her voice. "Chris, I need to tell you something. Mr. Patterson called another meeting for tomorrow morning. Word is, he's planning to let half the staff go by next week." The news hit Chris like a physical blow. He gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. "Half the staff? Emma, we're already stretched thin. And if they cut more people..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant: unemployment in a small Minnesota town during the harshest winter in decades. "I know," Emma whispered, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "But we can't give up hope. Maybe something will change." Little did either of them know that change was already walking through the front door. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through their conversation. Chris grabbed it on the second ring. "Pineview Inn, this is Chris." "Yeah, hi," came a gruff voice on the other end. "I'm calling about a guest who should be arriving any minute. Name's Thomas Bell. Thing is, he's had some trouble, lost his wallet, no credit cards. But he's good for it, I promise you that. Can you help him out?" Chris frowned, glancing at Emma who was watching curiously. "Sir, our policy requires payment upon check-in. Without proper identification or payment method dash." "Look, kid," the voice interrupted, "Thomas Bell is not the kind of man you want to turn away. Trust me on this. He'll make it worth your while." The line went dead, leaving Chris staring at the receiver. But what happened next shocked everyone in ways they never could have imagined. "Who was that?" Emma asked, but before Chris could answer, the front door chimed, and a figure stepped inside from the bitter Minnesota cold. Thomas Bell looked nothing like what Chris had expected from the mysterious phone call. The man appeared to be in his 60s, wearing a threadbare coat that had seen better days and boots with worn soles that squelched with melted snow. His gray hair was unkempt, and his weathered face bore the lines of someone who'd spent considerable time outdoors. But there was something about his eyes, sharp, intelligent, observing everything with the careful attention of someone who missed nothing. "Excuse me," Thomas approached the desk, his voice surprisingly warm despite his disheveled appearance. "I believe someone called about a room?" "Thomas Bell." Chris studied the man before him, feeling an inexplicable pull of empathy. This decision would change everything, though he had no way of knowing it yet. "Yes, Mr. Bell. I understand you've had some difficulty with payment? Thomas's shoulders sagged slightly. I'm afraid so. Had my wallet stolen earlier today. Everything was in there: ID, credit cards, cash. I know how this looks, but I give you my word I'm good for the payment. Emma shot Chris a warning look, but he was already reaching for a room key. Something about Thomas Bell felt different, honest in a way that Chris couldn't explain. Maybe it was the quiet dignity with which the man carried himself despite his obvious circumstances, or perhaps it was the way Thomas's eyes held a depth of experience that spoke of someone who'd seen both the best and worst of humanity. Don't worry about it, Mr. Bell, Chris heard himself saying, his voice steady despite Emma's sharp intake of breath. We'll get you sorted out. It's been a rough winter for everyone. But the real shock was still coming, and as Thomas Bell accepted the key with a grateful nod, neither Chris nor Emma could have imagined that they were looking at the man who held their futures, and the future of every employee at the Pineview in his weathered hands. The old rotary phone behind the front desk seemed to echo through the empty lobby as Chris hung up, his heart pounding with the weight of what he'd just agreed to do. A guest with no wallet, no credit card, nothing but a name and a promise he'd figure something out. Chris stared at the registration book where he'd written Thomas Bell in his careful handwriting, knowing full well he was about to make a decision that would stretch his already thin finances to the breaking point. 20 minutes later, the front door chimed, and Chris looked up to see a man who looked like he'd been sleeping rough for weeks. Thomas Bell was probably in his 60s, with graying hair that hadn't seen a comb in days and clothes that had clearly seen better times. His worn leather jacket was patched in several places, and his boots had holes that let in the Minnesota winter cold. But there was something about his eyes, alert, intelligent, almost studying everything around him with an intensity that didn't match his disheveled appearance. You must be Thomas, Chris said, extending his hand with a warm smile. I'm Chris Thompson. We spoke on the phone. Thomas shook his hand, and Chris noticed the man's grip was firm, confident. Thank you for this, Thomas said quietly. I know it's unusual circumstances. Everyone deserves a warm bed and a hot meal, Chris replied, pulling out the registration forms. Don't worry about payment right now. We'll figure something out. The words came out easily, but Chris felt his stomach clench as he thought about his own bills waiting at home. As Thomas filled out the paperwork, Chris noticed something that would stick with him. A young boy, maybe 8 years old, was sitting in one of the lobby's worn leather chairs, crying softly. His mother was at the vending machine, frantically searching through her purse. Hey buddy, what's wrong? Chris asked, walking over and crouching down to the boy's level. I dropped my toy car down the heating vent, the boy sniffled. It was my dad's when he was little. Without hesitation, Chris disappeared into the maintenance closet and returned with a coat hanger, carefully straightened and bent into a hook. He lay flat on the lobby floor, fishing around in the heating vent until he triumphantly pulled out a small red race car, dusty but intact. The boy's face lit up like Christmas morning. Thomas watched this entire interaction, his expression unreadable but attentive. When Chris returned to the desk, Thomas was studying him with renewed interest. That was kind of you, Thomas observed. Just doing what anyone would do, Chris shrugged, though the truth was, he'd learned long ago that not everyone would do what he'd just done. Later that evening, as Chris was preparing to lock up the front desk, Emma approached with a stack of papers and a grim expression. The 20-something had been working at the hotel since college, and Chris had watched her grow from a nervous part-timer to someone he trusted completely. Chris, we need to talk, she said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. I got the numbers from corporate today. They moved to the small office behind the front desk, where Emma spread out the financial reports like a doctor delivering bad news. We're down 30% from last year. The spring bookings are practically non-existent, and if things don't turn around by summer. She didn't need to finish the sentence. How many jobs? Chris asked quietly. At least 3, maybe 4. They're talking about keeping just a skeleton crew. Chris felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. These weren't just numbers to him, they were his co-workers, people with families and dreams and bills just like his own. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd just taken on a guest's bill when his own job might be disappearing. "We'll figure something out," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Meanwhile, upstairs in room 237, Thomas Bell stood by the window overlooking the hotel's small garden. The snow was beginning to melt, revealing patches of dormant earth that would soon bloom with spring flowers. He pulled out an expensive-looking cell phone, far too nice for someone in his apparent circumstances, and dialed a number. "It's me," he said quietly into the phone. "Yes, I'm here." "No, he doesn't know yet." "You were right about this place." "And about him." Thomas paused, watching as Chris's beat-up Honda pulled out of the parking lot below. "Tomorrow, I want you to arrange something. A small test." The next morning brought an unexpected flurry of activity. Emma was at the front desk when she noticed a sleek black sedan parked in the lot, far too expensive for their usual clientele. Through the lobby windows, she watched as Thomas emerged from the car, checking what appeared to be a very expensive watch before walking back toward the hotel entrance. Her blood ran cold. Something wasn't adding up, and Chris's trusting nature might be about to cost him everything. Emma stormed into the back office, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and confusion. Chris looked up from the invoices he'd been trying to balance, immediately sensing the tension radiating from his colleague. "Chris, we need to talk. Right now." Emma's voice carried an edge he'd rarely heard before. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, as if trying to contain whatever bombshell she was about to drop. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emma crossed her arms, her jaw set with determination. "It's about your precious guest, Thomas Bell. Something's not right about him, Chris. Something's really not right." Chris felt his stomach tighten. "What are you talking about? He's just a guy down on his luck who needed help." "Is he, though?" Emma pulled out her phone, scrolling through something before shoving the screen toward Chris. "I did some digging after you left yesterday. There are 3 Thomas Bells in the Minnesota area. One's a college student, one's a retiree in his 70s, and one." She paused dramatically. "One's listed as the CEO of a major corporation." Chris stared at the phone screen, his heart beginning to race. But something deeper inside him, something rooted in years of disappointment and broken trust, pushed back. "Emma, you can't just assume." "Can I?" Emma's voice rose. "Chris, think about this logically. A man shows up with no wallet, no identification, nothing, and you just blindly help him? What if he's lying? What if he's taking advantage of your kindness?" The accusation hit Chris like a physical blow. He stood up abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. The dark liquid spread across the financial documents, mirroring the chaos he felt inside. "You think I'm being naive?" Chris's voice cracked slightly. "You think I'm some kind of fool who can't see when someone's manipulating me?" Emma's expression softened for a moment, but she didn't back down. "I think you're so desperate to see the good in people that you ignore red flags. And right now, we can't afford that luxury. This hotel is hanging by a thread, Chris. We're talking about layoffs. Our jobs. Our livelihoods." Chris walked to the small window overlooking the hotel's garden, where the last patches of snow were melting away, revealing the first green shoots of spring. The sight reminded him of another time, another place, when someone had taken a chance on him. "You want to know why I helped him?" Chris turned back to Emma, his eyes glistening. "Because 7 years ago, I was Thomas Bell. Different name, different circumstances, but I was him." Emma's aggressive posture faltered slightly. "I was 22, fresh out of college, drowning in student loan debt. I'd been living in my car for 3 weeks, showering at the gym, trying to keep up appearances for job interviews." Chris's voice grew quieter, more introspective. "I walked into a small diner in Minneapolis, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, and when I went to pay, my card was declined. I had exactly 73 cents in my pocket." The office fell silent except for the gentle hum of the old heating system. The owner, Mrs. Rodriguez, She could have called me out, embarrassed me in front of the other customers. Instead, she told me the meal was on the house. Said I looked like I needed a break. Chris wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Do you know what she told me when I tried to thank her? Emma shook her head, her own eyes beginning to water. She said, "Honey, sometimes we all need someone to believe in us before we can believe in ourselves." That woman gave me more than a free meal. She gave me hope when I had nothing left. But just as Chris finished his story, Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced down, and her face went pale. "Chris." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've been watching the parking lot from my room. Thomas just got out of a black Mercedes. A brand new one. The license plate, it's not a rental." Chris felt the world tilt slightly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying either your down on his luck guest somehow acquired an expensive car overnight, or..." Emma paused, meeting his eyes. "Or he's been lying to us from the very beginning." Before Chris could respond, Emma was already heading for the door. "I'm going to find out who Thomas Bell really is. And if he's playing you, if he's taking advantage of your kindness, I'm going to put a stop to it." "Emma, wait." But she was already gone, leaving Chris alone with his doubts and the growing certainty that everything was about to change forever. Emma stood frozen in the hotel's back office, her hand trembling as she held her phone. The number for the local police department glowed on her screen, but something deep inside made her hesitate. She'd seen Thomas climb out of that expensive black sedan this morning, watched him speak quietly to the driver before dismissing the car with a casual wave. Nothing about it matched the story of a man who couldn't afford a hotel room. "What if I'm wrong?" she whispered to herself, thumb hovering over the call button. "What if Chris is right about giving people the benefit of the doubt?" The internal war raged within her. Her protective instincts screamed to shield Chris from potential deception, but her heart reminded her of all the times his kindness had saved someone who truly needed it. The phone slipped back into her pocket as she made her choice. For now, she would watch and wait. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Chris found Thomas sitting quietly by the fireplace, staring into the flames with an expression that seemed to carry the weight of the world. The harsh winter light streaming through the windows revealed details Chris hadn't noticed before: the quality of Thomas's coat, despite its wrinkled state, and a subtle sophistication in the way he carried himself. "Couldn't sleep?" Chris asked, settling into the adjacent chair. Thomas looked up, his eyes reflecting something between gratitude and guilt. "Sleep doesn't come easy when you've lost something precious." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been staying in hotels for 30 years, Chris. I've seen kindness and cruelty in equal measure, but what you did yesterday, covering my stay without question, that's becoming increasingly rare in this world." "Everyone deserves a chance," Chris replied simply. "Besides, I have a feeling you'd do the same for someone else." A knowing smile flickered across Thomas's face. "You might be surprised by how right you were about that." Their conversation was interrupted by the rumble of engines outside. Through the frost-covered windows, they watched in amazement as 3 tour buses pulled into the hotel's parking lot, their chrome bumpers gleaming in the winter sun. The sight was so unexpected that other staff members emerged from various corners of the hotel to witness what felt like a minor miracle. "What in the world?" Emma breathed, appearing beside them as the first bus door hissed open. Dozens of well-dressed tourists began filing out, their excited chatter filling the previously quiet morning air. They appeared to be part of some sort of luxury excursion, complete with professional photography equipment and elegant winter coats that spoke of considerable disposable income. The tour leader, a polished woman in her 40s, approached the front desk with purposeful strides. "Good morning. We're the Hawkins Investment Group retreat. I believe arrangements were made for our 3-day stay." Emma's jaw dropped. Hawkins Investment was one of the most prestigious firms in the region. She'd read about them in business magazines. Their decision to book an entire weekend at their struggling hotel was nothing short of miraculous. Chris quickly moved behind the desk, his professional demeanor taking over despite his shock. "Of course. Welcome to the Pineview Guest House. We're absolutely delighted to have you." But even as he checked them in, processing credit cards for amounts that would single-handedly pull the hotel from its financial emergency, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening. He glanced over at Thomas, who was watching the proceedings with an expression of quiet satisfaction that seemed oddly out of place for a man who claimed to have nothing. "Quite a coincidence," Thomas murmured, catching Chris's eye. A struggling hotel suddenly receiving exactly the kind of booking it needs to survive. There was something in his tone, a hint of knowledge, a suggestion that maybe this wasn't coincidence at all. Chris felt his pulse quicken as pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know existed began shifting into place. As the lobby filled with laughter and the warm energy of unexpected prosperity, Thomas stood and placed a gentle hand on Chris's shoulder. "Some things in life aren't what they appear to be, my friend. Sometimes the universe has a way of rewarding those who lead with their hearts instead of their wallets." Emma watched this exchange from across the room, her earlier suspicions now burning brighter than ever. The expensive car, the mysterious booking, Thomas's cryptic words, it was all too convenient, too perfectly timed. Tomorrow morning, she decided, she would demand answers, no matter what it cost their friendship. But tonight, as Chris worked late into the evening ensuring every guest felt welcomed and valued, he couldn't escape the growing certainty that his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. Chris takes a deep breath and walks across the lobby toward Thomas, who's sitting quietly by the fireplace, staring into the flames. The weight of everything, Emma's suspicions, the mysterious investments, the expensive car, has been building for days, and Chris can't carry the burden of uncertainty any longer. "Thomas," Chris says, settling into the chair across from him. "We need to talk." Thomas looks up, and for the first time, Chris notices something different in his eyes, not the weariness of a man down on his luck, but the calculating gaze of someone who's been watching and evaluating everything around him. "I figured this moment would come," Thomas says with a slight smile. "You're a perceptive man, Chris. More perceptive than most." "Emma thinks you're not who you say you are," Chris continues, his heart pounding. "The car, the phone calls, the way you seem to know things about hotel operations that a regular guest wouldn't. I covered for you because I believed in giving people a chance, but I need to know the truth." Thomas stands up slowly, reaching into his jacket pocket. Chris tenses, unsure what to expect, but Thomas pulls out a business card and hands it to him. Chris reads it twice before the words sink in. Thomas Bell, Chairman and CEO, Bell Hospitality Group. The room seems to spin around Chris. Bell Hospitality Group owns this hotel. Owns the entire chain of boutique hotels across the Midwest. Thomas Bell isn't just wealthy, he's a billionaire whose company employs thousands of people. "You're..." Chris stammers, looking between the card and Thomas's face. "The owner, yes," Thomas confirms, sitting back down. "I've been coming to my hotels unannounced for 15 years, Chris. Usually, I find polite but distant service, efficiency over empathy, profit margins prioritized over people. But you did something I've never experienced before." Chris feels his face flush with embarrassment and confusion. "You let me pay for your room. You watched me struggle with the decision, knowing I could barely afford it." "I did," Thomas admits, his voice gentle but serious. "And that wasn't easy for me to watch. But Chris, in my entire career, no employee has ever put their own financial well-being at risk to help what they believed was a stranger in need. You didn't know who I was, you had no expectation of reward, and you still chose kindness." Emma appears from around the corner, clearly having been listening. Her face shows a mixture of vindication and amazement. "So I was right about you not being who you claimed," she says, walking toward them. Thomas nods respectfully. "Emma, your loyalty to Chris and your protective instincts for this hotel impressed me greatly. You questioned inconsistencies while still supporting your colleague. That kind of thoughtful leadership is exactly what this company needs." Chris is still processing everything. The investment money, the tour bus, the sudden increase in bookings, that was all you? "The tour bus was a test run," Thomas explains. "I wanted to see how you'd handle increased business, whether your service standards would remain high under pressure. You and Emma exceeded every expectation." You didn't just manage the influx, you made every single guest feel personally welcomed. Thomas stands and walks to the window, looking out at the Minnesota landscape that's now showing early signs of spring. Chris, I started this company because I believed hotels should be more than just places to sleep. They should be havens where people feel genuinely cared for. Over the years, as we've grown, I've worried that we've lost that soul in pursuit of efficiency and profit. He turns back to face them both. Your willingness to sacrifice for a stranger reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. It reminded me that hospitality isn't about thread counts or amenities, it's about human connection. Emma looks stunned. So what happens now? To the hotel, to us? Thomas's face brightens with the first genuine smile Chris has seen from him. Now, we rebuild this place properly. Full renovation, expanded marketing, premium positioning, but maintaining the heart that you two have created here. Chris, I'm offering you the position of general manager, not just of this hotel, but as my regional director for community-focused hospitality initiatives. Chris feels tears welling up in his eyes. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Emma urges, grabbing his arm excitedly. Chris, this is incredible. And Emma, Thomas continues, I'd like you to head our new guest experience program. Your instincts about people and your dedication to this community are exactly what we need to train other staff members across the chain. The lobby suddenly feels different to Chris, not shabby or struggling, but full of potential and warmth. The same space where he'd worried about layoffs and unpaid bills is now buzzing with possibility. There's one condition, Thomas adds with a grin. I'm personally reimbursing you for my stay, with interest. And Chris, acts of kindness like yours deserve recognition. We're establishing the Chris Thompson Kindness Fund, a program where employees can nominate guests or community members for assistance, and the company will provide support. Chris can barely speak through his emotion. You're naming a program after me? After what you represent, Thomas clarifies. The reminder that business success means nothing if we lose our humanity in the process. As the three of them stand together in the lobby that will soon be transformed, Chris realizes that his simple act of covering a stranger's hotel bill has changed not just his life, but potentially the lives of countless guests and employees throughout the entire chain. The lesson is crystal clear and universal: genuine kindness, offered without expectation of reward, has the power to transform everything it touches. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion create the biggest waves of positive change. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always matters. And remember, you never know when your simple act of caring might change someone's entire world.